Hey everybody, so one of the things we're going to be looking at here is I want to mount this voltmeter onto my bike. And the big reason I want to do that is if you've seen some of my other videos, you'll know I've had a few electrical problems with this bike which I thought I had fixed. I do not have them fixed. So a voltmeter will give me an indication of if I'm getting enough volts to charge a battery and run the system, or if I'm too low, or if it's swinging all over the place. It's indications of other things. We'll get into that later. However, I don't have a good place to mount this. I want to put it here, but I've got some of these bolts in my windshield. So what I'm going to have to do is make a custom bracket to mount that. And I'll show you what I'm making that out of here. So what I want to do is basically mount this onto the mounting for my speedometer and my tach. And what I'm going to be using is just this piece of steel. It's a piece of flat bar. It's about 3 inches, about 1/8 of an inch thick. And I'm obviously going to have to work this a bit to make it look half decent and get it bent into the right shape. And then I'll have to paint it. So this is going to be the process of me doing some metal working. Something that I don't do much of, as I'm actually a woodworker. So this should be interesting. Alright, so I've done a rough calculation here, and I'm going to cut off a 7-inch chunk of this steel and then start cutting out and bending it into the proper shape. Now, like I said before, I'm a woodworker, so I do have woodworking tools. Now what I've done here in my jigsaw is I've put in a metal cutting blade, so hopefully that's good for 1/8 of an inch steel. I have a feeling it may or may not be. But if not, I do have an angle grinder and we can stick the blade in there. This is obviously going to be less intricate than this. So let's give this a shot and see how it goes. That worked pretty good. That's basically the same blade as you'd have in a hacksaw, except it can work way faster than you can. So I'm impressed. This maybe won't be as tough as I thought. Okay, so what I've done is I've drawn an outline on here in red pencil. Probably a little tough to see on camera, but maybe there you can kind of see it. And that's basically where this gauge is going to go. So this little screw-on back thing, the gauge goes in, the back screws on, so this has to be a fairly precise size. And so I have to cut that out. Now what I'm going to do is use my jigsaw again, but I'm going to have to drill a hole in it first. Let's see how well this thing is at cutting through steel. Alright, so after cutting for a while, I've managed to hack out a hole in this thing. The problem being is that blade is too wide to really, turn a corner. But I have a basic hole cut out. So now I'm going to have to break out the files and do a couple hours worth of filing. Huzzah. Alright, so trying to file that by hand can be done, will take a long time, but that sucks. So what I got here is I've got this little Dremel bit, and it's basically a stone. And let's see how that works. Well, I guess when you snap it off, it doesn't work worth a hell, does it? Well, filing's too tough, and that little stone thing just broke. Well, let's try some round sanders and see what happens here. Alright, so after a bunch of work with the round sander here, that fits in pretty nice. Now all you gotta do is draw a shape around the outside, cut that out, and get it all smoothed out. Making progress. Okay, so the next thing I want to do here now is cut off this excess. Basically, I'm just going to make this into a big wedge shape, and then I'm going to bend it into the appropriate shape. And I'm also just going to round this off the top here. So more cutting with the old jigsaw. Alright, so I've roughly cut this thing out now. You can see it's very rough. So what I'm going to do now is take the grinder and try and smooth that out a bit, even it out, and then we'll be close to having our basic template done, and now I got to start bending it. Alright, so after a bunch of grinding and a little bit of polishing on the edges with the sander, I think I got my basic template cut out here. So what I'm going to do now is bend it into shape and kind of get it fit on there, and then I'll probably sand it up and try and get all the garbage off that I can, and then I'll give it a paint job and we'll have to install it. Making progress. Well, now that we have the basic shape cut out, what we want to do now is just maybe polish it up a bit, especially before we do all the bending. It's going to be easier when it's nice and flat. So you can see I've got a little bit of paint residue and other stuff on here, so let's clean it up. Okay, so I've gone through and just used some emery paper on this stuff, and it's nice and smooth now, and I am going to be painting this, but I want to get it bent into shape first. So that's the next step. We've got to get this bent into shape. Now, when you go to bend it, you got to remember that this piece that goes on the back is going to need enough room to snug up against this gauge. So you're going to want to make sure you leave, say that much room before you bend it. So don't go and bend it, and then of course you can't get your gauge in there. Okay, so I've put this bracket into my vise here, and I've got it straight. Now of course what I want to do is bend it. And for that, we're going to try the old mallet. Not bad. A quick check, looks like I shouldn't have any problem. Well, maybe I will. No, that should still work lovely. All right, good stuff. So I've just been grinding down this part here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on there, and that's where I'm going to mount it. And I did check with my windshield. I want to make sure that the gauge and the wiring in that isn't going to be rubbing up against the windshield, and that's all good. So now what I need to do is drill a hole in it. And that's going to be the fun part, because I need to make sure that's accurate. Alright, so I've drilled the holes in it, and I've just kind of mounted it on there to see what it's going to look like, and it's looking pretty good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a coat of paint, and what I have is something called gloss aluminum from Tremclad, so hopefully that'll help keep the rust off of it. Okay, so we're back to having a look at our bracket here. So I painted it up the other day. I gave it 2 coats of that it's Tremclad rust stuff. I don't know how good Tremclad is at keeping rust off. I guess we're going to find out. But this is a gloss aluminum, so it's not quite chrome, but it looks pretty good. So this is my little bracket. So next step is we got to mount that on the old bike here. So let's check that out. Alright, so our next step here, second to last step, is we want to mount this thing on here. Now I've drilled a hole through the bracket on my speedometer and tach bracket here. And what we want to do is we just want to mount this thing up here like this. Now, I'm using washers, but I'm also using rubber washers here, so I don't want any metal on metal. I want this thing to, be well secured and somewhat waterproof. I don't want water getting inside some of these places. So, washer with brackets, put that on. Now, next step is we want to put a washer, a rubber washer, behind this thing to keep the metal from being on metal. Now hopefully I can get that through there. Good. Put on our bracket. And then we will put on another washer. Except that one's too big. Hang tight. So I'm dealing with fairly confined quarters back here. It's a little tough to see it, but I'll get you a shot of it after. So what I'm doing is I have a 5/16 bolt, and I'm actually stretching a 1/4 inch rubber washer on it because it's small enough to fit into these spaces. And that ought to give me, I'm hoping, everything I need. Okay. Metal washer followed by lock washer. Oh no, too tight of quarters. All right, we're gonna have to figure this out a little bit here. All right, so just a couple minutes with the angle grinder, and I kind of ground it down just enough to fit into this sort of a odd looking spot here. Boy, I sure hope I'm going to be able to get all this in here. And then lock washer. And finally, a nut. Which is, of course, my fingers are too sausage-like to fit in there. So let's see what we can do with this. Okay, I think we got now I want to get that nice and tight because I do not want it to be moving around on me. Now, of course, the billion-dollar question, is it straight? Well, that looks pretty good. So, next step, let's put the gauge in it and see what happens. All right, so let's put our gauge in there. Basically all that happens is this plastic thing screws on the back. Now again, do we have it straight? Okay, so that's on there. Looks pretty straight. All right, next step. Let's plug the wires in and see if the windshield fits. I got the wires on, and obviously it's not wired up yet. That's step 20 of 25 or whatever we're at here. Now I did measure this before I created this, but let's just see if it fits with the windshield on. All right, I'm just going to tighten it down and see what happens here. So I think I got that just a little close to the windshield. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to bend it ever so slightly and get it away from the windshield, otherwise it's going to rattle on there and maybe mess up the wiring. Alright, so I've got it mounted on there. I've reinstalled the windshield and I've got, not quite a finger width between the windshield and that, so it, gives you a little room for air, vibration, and whatever. Now, I don't know what that's going to look like when I'm riding. Hopefully it won't vibrate too much. I mean, V-twins are notorious for a little vibration, but I don't think it's going to rattle any more than my speedometer and tach there, so hopefully everything will look good. There you go, she's mounted. Now all I got to do is wire it up. So this ought to be fun.